I've made throughout the debate on second reading,
especially ones about golf.
And hearing various remarks about population health from various members, and certainly the approach that we are taking, we intend to take through the Office of Health Promotion is very much based on that population health model, because it's vital that our office is much more than working just with stakeholders or just within our own office. It's vital that we work with departments such as community services on food security, on various other issues, on providing more opportunities for young people to get involved in such areas of sport, working with education, whether it's facilities, whether it's on healthy eating, working with Department of Health and Addiction Services, and right across the board. So I certainly appreciate the comments made throughout second reading, and I can assure the members that it's very important for the office to take a multi-sectoral approach, and that an appropriate plan, Mr. Speaker, will be put forward very shortly, in fact, and we have made a commitment to increase resources. We will do that, and be investing in such areas as physical activity and healthy eating initiatives, and tobacco, and that was brought up by a few members on the other side, including the member from Halifax Citadel. And certainly I think that it's appropriate that we do make an investment in the tobacco strategy. Indeed, the tax increase on tobacco is part of that strategy, but it's just as important that we invest in such programs as cessation aids. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will close second reading, and I will move second reading of Bill number 46.
Motion is for second reading on Bill number 46. Is the House ready for the question? Would all those in favour signify by saying aye? Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 46, entitled an act to amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act, to establish the Office of Health Promotion.
Order the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. Recognize the Deputy House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under public bills for second reading, I call Bill number 51, Provincial Acadian Day Act. Oh, excuse me, a correction. Mr. Speaker, I will call Bill number 47, Council of Atlantic Premiers. Thank you.
Bill number 47, Council of Atlantic Premiers. I'll recognize the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of the Premier this afternoon, I'm pleased to move second reading of Bill 47. And I have some notes here that's being prepared for me, Mr. Speaker, and I intend to go through them because I think that perhaps some people, and I'm one of them, are not absolutely aware of what this bill does. Mr. Speaker, this bill, well, you might as well be honest about it.
Good, honest government here.
Mr. Speaker, I have no aspirations to. I have no aspirations to become Premier of the province. So I wasn't with the Premier when he visited with the other Atlantic premiers, and they discussed the introduction of this bill right across the Atlantic provinces. Mr. Speaker, this bill will enshrine in legislation the Council of Atlantic Premiers, which was formally established by way of an agreement between the 4 Atlantic Canadian provinces in May 2000 in Moncton. Prior to this agreement being signed, the Council of Maritime Premiers operated from 1971. On occasion, Newfoundland and Labrador joined the 3 maritime premiers for the meetings. For example, early in our time in office, through such informal discussions among the 4 Atlantic provinces, Nova Scotia was able to negotiate a more favorable agreement through Atlantic Lotto, generating millions more to Nova Scotia each and every year. But there was no formal body, Mr. Speaker, in place to represent Atlantic Canadian interests on the national stage and to foster cooperative initiatives between the 4 Atlantic provinces. I think all members, regardless of political party, will agree with me that it is vital that Atlantic Canada speak with one voice on issues of common concern. Issues like healthcare funding and the ongoing refusal of the federal government to adopt the funding formula recommended by Roy Romano in his Royal Commission, etc. It is shameful that Ottawa continues to pay only 16 cents out of every health dollar spent on health. Issues like equalization, Canada's constitutional guarantee that all Canadians, regardless of where they live, receive comparable levels of service at comparable levels of taxation. It is shameful that Ottawa has failed to adopt the equalization formula presented unanimously by the provinces for the last 5 years. Issues like transportation infrastructure and the systematic confiscation of federal gas tax dollars to its general revenues when it should be spent on the region's national highways. I say confiscation because of the more than $140 million Ottawa collects in gas tax from Nova Scotia motorists, less than $10 million is returned to Nova Scotia highways. And in Nova Scotia, unlike most other provinces, the provincial government is responsible for more than 90% of the highways, roads, and bridges in the province. Speaker, that's an item that I think sometimes the federal government, when they speak of sharing gasoline tax dollars with municipalities, forget that in this province, 90% of the highways are under the jurisdiction of the province and only 10% under the municipalities. Whereas in Ontario, it is exactly the opposite. The province of Ontario is only responsible for 10% of the highways in the province of Ontario, and the municipalities are responsible for 90%. That means, Mr. Speaker, whereas in the province of Nova Scotia, with only 800 or 900,000 people resident in this province, we look after, that is we, I mean the provincial government looks after something in the order of 24,000 kilometres of highway. In the province of Ontario, a province with approximately 10 million population and a much, much larger land area, the province of Ontario only looks after about 25,000, only another couple of thousand more kilometres of roads than Nova Scotia does. So I think, Mr. Speaker, that's a very important item that we'll have to continue to keep tabs on when the feds get finally around to sharing tax dollars with the provinces and municipalities. The Council has been doing much to advancing Atlantic Canada's agenda at the federal level and among our provincial territorial counterparts. The Council of Atlantic Premiers is a body that fosters real, tangible cooperation as a region. In late 2001, the 4 Atlantic Premiers signed a Working Together for Atlantic Canada, an action plan for the region. Through the action plan, we now have harmonized trucking regulations as they pertain to weights and measures of trucks. Through the action plan, we have a common review for new pharmaceuticals. Through the action, we have established the Atlantic Provinces Community College Consortium. This consortium will help standardize program development and the delivery of community college courses throughout Atlantic Canada. It will also expand the transferability of credits at the campuses throughout the region. More recently, the 4 Atlantic provinces have worked together through the Joint Insurance Harmonization Task Force. This task force is providing valuable advice to the 4 Atlantic provinces as we deal with the cost of insurance on all our consumers. And just this past February, at the last meeting in Corner Brook, Nova Scotia and PEI were successful in convincing our Atlantic colleagues of the need to take action to support our agricultural industries. The Atlantic Canada Action Team on Food is working hard to increase consumption of local beef and other food products in Nova Scotia and across Atlantic Canada. Mr. Speaker, the Council of Atlantic Premiers Act is worthwhile legislation. It will update our existing laws, which refer only to the defunct Council of Maritime Premiers. Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill 47 for second reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to rise here in the place of our leader, the honourable member from Clare, to say a few words on Bill number 47, an act to establish the Council of Atlantic Premiers. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, our caucus does welcome the creation of this new council and the welcoming of Newfoundland as part of this new body. Mr. Speaker, this is something that we believe should have been done a long time ago, and we find it quite ironic. And the words from the government House leader saying that the agreement was reached in the year 2000 to create this new council, yet it's 2004 before it actually takes place. So it's once again Tory governments working at lightning speed, another example of it here. And you know, someone has even suggested that the fact that Newfoundland and Labrador had a Liberal government up until 2004 had more to do with why this hadn't taken place prior to today. And so I'll leave it to the Minister, the government House leader, who now hopefully is actually aware what Bill 47 is about now, having not been aware when he first stood. Maybe he can confirm for us whether that was actually the case. Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt that Atlantic Canadians would support seeing the four governments working together and to speak with a common voice and to become more of a viable force on the national stage to fight for issues facing Atlantic Canada. As individual provinces, it is easy for the larger provinces to dismiss us, but as a group representing the needs of our region, it's clear that we will become stronger and more effective. The people of Newfoundland and Labrador and their governments over the years have proven themselves as important players on the national stage. Adding their culture, diversity, and unique perspective on Canada will make the new Council of Atlantic Premiers stronger and more effective than their successful predecessor, the Council of Maritime Premiers. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal caucus is clearly glad to support this bill, a bill that we believe will strengthen the negotiating power for all Atlantic Canadians. Now, Speaker, I'd also want to point out that it's interesting we're bringing Newfoundland in as part of this new council, and I would certainly hope that the Premier will take this opportunity to sit and listen to the people of Newfoundland, especially their governments, who have obviously proven to be one up on the Premier on several issues. And one could be reminded of just how well the Premier did for the people of Nova Scotia in the battle for the Laurentian sub-basin, where at one point it looked like Newfoundland was going to get Glace Bay as part of the agreement. That's how close they came to our shores. I know the MLA for Glace Bay was concerned that he was going to be, he was actually going to lose his riding to Newfoundland and Labrador, whereas our Premier was gallantly fighting for us to try to get us as much of that sub-basin as possible. So he could certainly learn a few things from Newfoundland on that front. One of the other things you might want to learn from Newfoundland is some of the protectionism that they have been exercising in regards to their offshore. The fact that Nova Scotia crews leave this province, go work on the offshore, and the minute they hit the port in Newfoundland are promptly told, you're off the ship, a Newfoundlander is going to replace you. That continues to happen. We continue to raise those examples with the Premier. The Premier keeps writing back about these wonderful agreements that are in place and that they'll continue to monitor the situation. Mr. Speaker, clearly that is not what is taking place right now. Now, I do note that, Mr. Speaker, although the government House leader professed to have no idea what Bill number 47 was about, the government spin doctors who wrote his notes were clear to take their usual shots at Ottawa, which is something Nova Scotians have grown very tired of hearing from this government repeatedly over and over again. A foggy day in Nova Scotia now certainly is the blame of Prime Minister Paul Martin in Ottawa for having sent the fog down to us here in Nova Scotia. It was a bit amusing today, Mr. Speaker, to hear the different messages coming from the Premier when he announced that he was going to break his promise in regards to a tax cut. And he said Ottawa and started arguing about how much money they were not receiving for health care, and then went on to say, because of Ottawa's decisions, they've interrupted our plan for tax cuts. Well, now, that begs the question, are you asking Ottawa for more money to give tax cuts in Nova Scotia or to fix health care? Which one is it? I think even the Premier's confused as to what he's actually looking for in that regard. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians all support the notion of getting more funding from Ottawa, but the hypocrisy of this government continually attacking Ottawa, when how many times have we caught the current Minister of Health and his predecessors making announcements of new equipment, hospital equipment around this province, and trying to take credit when clearly the funding was solely coming from Ottawa? How many times have we caught the Minister of Community Services going to announce daycare spaces and support for early childhood education, only to once again find out 100% of the funding was coming from Ottawa? Yet, they have the gall to stand in front here in this House and continue to criticize Ottawa without ever once acknowledging some of the investments that have taken place. And then they wonder why they have no success in Ottawa. Well, maybe...
The Honourable Minister of Education on point of order.
I guess it is. I just want to make sure I'm clear on what the honourable member from Richmond is saying, is that he is saying that, you know, at the meeting of the Prime Minister with the provincial and territorial premiers this summer, that he is opposing Ottawa giving any more money to the provinces and territories for health. I mean, I think I just heard him say that, but I would like to have that clarified.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if that's the interpretation he had, it's no wonder his government's in a minority position right now. And I'd say the future doesn't bode very well for them either, but I've come to expect that from that member during his days as health minister, and he clearly couldn't understand anything at that time or understand any of the messages from Nova Scotians, so apparently nothing's changed, although he's landed in the education department, and based on the fact he says university are getting more money, tuitions continue to rise under his nose, and he doesn't appear to be catching on to that either.
Famous line, you're
Mr. Speaker,
the furthest to McIsaac.
Legion of Doom is what we could call that. But Mr. Speaker, the message is quite clear. Do we agree that we should be receiving more funding from Ottawa? Yes. It's all in the approach that's being taken by this government. The minute they get elected, they say, okay, we're going to go after Ottawa for more money. We're going to make this great reasoned argument, or at least that's what Nova Scotians thought. We're going to make a great reasoned argument. We're going to send a delegation. We're going to establish facts. We're going to put a presentation together. Well, that's not what we got. We got postcards, mail Ottawa postcards. That was the approach from this government. Send out postcards that land at the desk of the Prime Minister, and that's going to convince them to give Nova Scotia more money. Not logic, not reason, a postcard. Mr. Speaker, I think it's clear what kind of effect that has had, and the fact that this government has to blame Ottawa for their own financial woes on a continual basis.
The Honourable Member, Minister of Community Services on a point of order.
Very interested in the honourable member's comments, and as it pertains to funding from Ottawa, I was always fascinated that former Premier McClellan would agree to go to a per capita basis for CHST, that's healthcare fund, essentially the health and social transfer, even though his staff were encouraging him not to sign that agreement. And perhaps the honourable member could explain, not only to the House, but perhaps to all Nova Scotians, why the Liberals were in favour of going to a per capita funding basis when Nova Scotia's got a disproportionately older population, and the previous formula was better for Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's not a point of order. The Honourable Member has the floor. The Honourable Member from Richmond.
No, Mr. Speaker, it's quite obvious as you watch that the government ministers will do everything they possibly can now to try to deflect from their own ineptitude at being able to get money from Ottawa, and the fact that when they look at their counterparts in New Brunswick, for example, if I'm not mistaken, Bernard Lord, how much was it, $400 million for highway infrastructure in the province, and what have we received here? Nothing close to that same amount of money. So, well, who's to blame in that case? Do we blame Ottawa for that also, or do we accept the fact that other provinces are having better success in dealing with Ottawa than what this province has been successful to date? And the reason why? Well, you see the Minister of Health announcing new health equipment and the Minister of Community Services announcing new childcare spaces, and then trying to take full credit for it, knowing that the money has solely come from Ottawa. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's quite clear that this government approach is not working, and it is not going to work, and Nova Scotians have been sending the message. This government has been doing polling, and they're hearing from that polling that's clearly telling them that Nova Scotians have grown sick and tired of seeing the Premier continually blaming Ottawa for everything, rather than putting together a concrete plan and proposal to present to the federal government as to why Nova Scotia requires more funding. The minute that logic and reason comes into this government's approach with Ottawa, I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, at that point, we will have better success. But until that is achieved, we will continue to see other provinces having success at the investments being made from Ottawa and Nova Scotians being left behind because a government that simply does not know how to deal with the federal government. In fact, it certainly didn't even know how to deal with Newfoundland when it came to the Laurentian sub-basin, considering the deal that Nova Scotians were left with. Speaker, I also found it a bit amusing to hear the Minister of Transportation, Government House Leader, criticizing Ottawa for the amount of gas tax investment. Well, I'd encourage the Minister of Transportation to come visit Richmond County or some of the other rural areas of Nova Scotia and justify to them just how much investments that his government has been making, especially in light of the fact that in the past 2 years, they have collected an extra $50 million in gas tax revenue due to Neil LeBlanc's 2-cent per litre increase. $50 million. And where did that $50 million go? Have we seen an additional $50 million in funding for transportation? That's certainly not the case. So before the Minister of Transportation starts shooting arrows over at Ottawa for how they've dealt with the gas tax, he'd probably do best to look at what his government's record has been. And I'm curious, the mayor from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley doesn't stand in his place to object, he being the one who was so proud of his government that they would commit every cent that was raised through gas tax, license renewal, vehicle registration would go back into roads. That was promised 5 years ago. It still has not been done today. We haven't heard that member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley say one thing about truckers ever since this government took power. Before that, every session, if there was an increase in gas tax, an increase on tire costs, an increase in the, or a decrease, I should say, in some of the tipping fees, and some of the freight rates that were being provided, we would hear from that member and he'd speak up for the truckers. And unfortunately, he has fell silent due to this government inability to deal with any of the issues facing truckers or any of the issues facing so many other small businesses here in this province. So this government wants to see more money come from Ottawa on gas tax. I say on behalf of the people of Richmond County, we want to see more money coming into our roads from the gas tax that we pay here in this province. So let the Minister of Transportation lead by example in this particular case. So, Mr. Speaker, with those comments, I'm sure with the budget being announced on Thursday, we'll continue to hear from the Finance Minister and the Premier, blame everything on Ottawa. Let's be honest as to what the situation we're in. In 1999, John Ham told the people of Nova Scotia, healthcare does not need any more money. Healthcare needs better management. Too much administrative fat in healthcare is why we have trouble in healthcare. Does not need any more money. The Blue Book says it, in case the Minister of Education has forgotten that also. No more money for healthcare, better management. 5 years later, $600 million later, we still have the Premier saying that healthcare is out of control, it needs an influx of a ton of money, and there's no end to how much money it's going to need. At what point will the Premier finally stand in a spot and say, I accept that the healthcare system has been my greatest failure as the Premier of this province. I have not been able to fix healthcare. I've come nowhere near fixing healthcare. It is out of control. I need more money from everywhere as I can possibly imagine to put into healthcare. Just look at the words in the Premier's own Blue Book. Once the Premier is prepared to admit that to Nova Scotians, admit that he has failed to get control of healthcare, I think Nova Scotians will finally start to believe and have certainly a bit more credibility in him. One of the other realities, not only in 1999 did he say he could fix healthcare without putting any more money into it, better management. Since 1999, based on the increase in taxes, the increase in user fees, the government enjoying a strong economy, today this government has $1 billion in additional yearly revenue than the government had that it defeated in 1999. $1 billion extra per year. Where has it gone? Why are Nova Scotians not reaping the benefits of an additional $1 billion in yearly revenue? And it's only going to get higher because his tax cut that he gave, well, he had to cut that today. He's increased, 500 user fees. So it's only going to grow. But ask Nova Scotians, is this province better off today with that extra $1 billion in revenue? Well, even if there's any Nova Scotians who thought that, we have the Premier of the province telling us we're not. And we need more money from Ottawa, and more money from Ottawa. The question to Nova Scotians that Nova Scotians must ask themselves, how much longer can the people of this province afford the John Ham government? It's truly coming to the point where Nova Scotians are going to have to tell us and the opposition to say, we've had enough. $1 billion more. He said he could fix health care. He didn't need any more money. $600 million later, he still needs more money. The roads are in disastrous shape. Schools are not being built at the rate where they should be being built to replace aging infrastructure. Roads, bridges, other necessary infrastructure for this province to grow is not being replaced at the rate it should be. And the question is, how much more is it going to take for this government to be able to provide Nova Scotians with the good governance that they deserve, to provide them with the framework for this province to grow, to provide us with an ability to allow our young Nova Scotians to remain in their communities and to remain in this province so that we can grow our province rather than continually see them leave year by year and our population continues to decrease, whereas it should be increasing. Mr. Speaker, bringing in Newfoundland, I hope, is going to make this council stronger. I think the Premier has a lot that he can learn from Newfoundland based on our previous dealings with them and how we've always come on the losing side when we've been up against Newfoundland. Nova Scotians deserve a better government. They deserve a government that's not going to send postcards to Ottawa, but is going to sit with Ottawa, look for strategic investments, be able to point out to Ottawa, here is exactly where we would like to spend money, here's how much it's going to cost, here's what the resulting benefit for that will be. The minute Nova Scotians see that this government actually has a reasoned plan that they can present to Nova Scotians, present to Ottawa to say, here is where we need money, here's what we will do with it, and here is how it is going to grow this province. At that point, Mr. Speaker, I believe this province will start achieving success, will start matching the investments that other provinces have been able to get from the federal government, and at the end of the day, provide all Nova Scotians from one end of this province to the next with the good governance that they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further interventions on Bill 47? Seeing none, then I'll recognize the Deputy Premier. Close
I move second reading of Bill number 47.
Motion is for second reading on Bill number 47. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Nay, contrary minded? Motion carried.
Premiers.
Order that the bill be referred to the Committee of Law Amendments. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 48, the Education Act?
Bill number 48, the Education Act. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in the House to speak to Bill number 48, which is an act to amend the Education Act, and more specifically, it has to do with expanding or make it easier for members of the public and worthwhile groups to have access to school facilities. And what it does is enables a school board to make school facilities available free of charge to community youth groups or other groups which are designated by the minister. Mr. Speaker, this is a much needed amendment to the Education Act, and it is also a major part of the Learning for Life plan, which was introduced by this government some years ago. And it is consistent with the efforts of the Minister of Health Promotion, the Minister of Health, and the Premier and myself to encourage more of our youth to live a more active and healthier lifestyle. Over the course of years, there have been many reports, including one called Active Kids, Healthy Kids, recommendation for a Nova Scotia strategy, These reports have recommended and encouraged greater access to community facilities like school gyms and playing fields as appropriate ways to improve opportunities for physical activity, particularly among children and youth. And with this amendment, Mr. Speaker, the government is taking a significant step forward by making more of schools and school facilities available at a more reasonable cost to children and youth. And what it does is that it allows young people up to the age of 21, which is the limiting age for public schools, to use publicly owned school facilities such as gymnasiums and playing fields without rental fees. A youth group will pay only for additional costs that a school board would incur as a result of the group's use of the school. Now, some of these additional costs could include extra custodial services if a group doesn't clean up, replacement of supplies such as paper, damaged equipment, or staff that would open and close the school if it was necessary, deemed necessarily by the school board or by contracts. Fact is, though, there would be no rental fee for the facility. Any costs that would occur would be because they are out-of-pocket costs for the school board. And this means, Mr. Speaker, that schools and youth groups will be able to arrange many opportunities where there is not going to be any cost at all for the use of a school facility. For example, if a youth group uses a school gym on an evening when staff are in the school anyway, or they have the opportunity for their own supervision and clean up after themselves, and they don't damage anything or use any school supplies, then there will be no charge for this group to use the school gym. Not-for-profit groups will have access to schools at nominal fees to cover school board costs like heat, electricity, and supervision. And of course, they will also pay for any direct additional costs in the same manner as youth groups. School boards may charge commercial or for-profit organizations a higher fee. And I should say, Mr. Speaker, that it's not in the intent of this piece of legislation to put public schools into competition with the private sector, such as those who rent facilities for profit or as a business. And thus, the for-profit groups or commercial groups, if they choose to use school facilities, would be charged a higher fee. Mr. Speaker, the amendment which we are introducing is also part of a new provincial policy on the community use of schools. Historically, school boards have developed their own practices, which has led to some variation in access and user fees. The new provincial policy will help to standardize requirements for obtaining access to school by user groups. It should provide greater consistency in user fees, and it will help address issues of scheduling, cleaning, security, supervision, and liability. And we hope, Mr. Speaker, that our efforts will ensure a more uniform access across the province to public schools for community use. We also believe it will ensure a more standardized approach to setting fees, particularly for nonprofit groups. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the policy allows for enhanced partnerships between communities and schools. As we know today, many school boards and municipalities have agreements to use each other's facilities. These existing joint use agreements will continue, and indeed, through this legislation, we believe it will encourage more. Mr. Speaker, I must say, unfortunately, that this policy does not apply to 3P schools. This is a difficult thing, and it is a shame, but there was an arbitrator's decision in January 2003 which determined that private developers of P3 schools have the sole right to manage community access to their buildings. Nevertheless, a P3 developer could decide of its own accord to adopt our provincial policy just the same, and we hope that they do. And if that happens, we're sure that people in the communities where P3 schools are located will be most appreciative. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Education has worked with school boards on the policy, and we've also worked with the Office of Health Promotion through its sport and recreation staff, and I thank Minister MacDonald for making the services of his staff available. And I want to thank all of the partners for their help. Together, we've developed a policy that will give young people more affordable opportunities for physical activity, and at the same time will not burden school boards with additional costs. We sent a nearly final draft of the policy to school boards last fall, and the boards are now working at that policy and adapting it to a specific use for their own community and developing schools policy to match it. School boards, of course, are going to have the flexibility to establish their own operating procedures and to address local needs in ways that make sense to them within a broad framework. Mr. Speaker, this is a good amendment. It's an amendment which is a good move for all Nova Scotians to help us improve our physical activity and to help reintegrate our schools into the community use type of facilities that they should be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to making some comments on this very important topic, not just in the growing community that I'm fortunate enough to represent, but from parents and young people and for seniors that I've heard on this issue all across this province. You know, Mr. Speaker, I know all members will agree with us, no matter where we represent, that schools have to be and must always remain the focal point of our communities. The focal point where people can come and have a meeting in the evening, where they can go and pick their kids up after a practice, where they can, if the need arises, use the facility on Sunday as the church perhaps wants to have a presentation of some sort. They can use the cafeteria, they can use the kitchen facilities, a school that is a focal point in the community. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've brought this to the attention of the Halifax Regional School Board on a number of occasions. I've brought it to the attention of members on all sides of the House, and there have been other members of this legislature who've brought the concern forward saying, well, it doesn't work that way in my community. I wish it worked the way in the community that I grew up in, where I was fortunate enough to have a dad who had the keys to the school. And the principal gave my father the keys to the school. And when my father wanted to have a dryland hockey practice, or if he wanted to take us into the gymnasium so that we could work on some plays, because of course the ice time in the small community that I was living in at the time certainly was in big demand, my father had the keys to the school. He had the keys to one of the most important facilities in the community in which I grew up. Now, Mr. Speaker, those are the good old days, because the principal in my community trusted my father with the school keys. And he always said, just turn the lights off when you're finished, Mr. Estabrooks, and make sure the guys don't leave a mess. And how appreciative we were of that. Now, there are communities across this province where I have been told that still happens. There are communities where there are principals and there are school boards who say that there are certain people in the community, if they want to use the school. I mean, how can you turn down the minister of the local church whose congregation is having a drama presentation at Easter or at Christmas? You certainly can trust the minister of the local church to make sure that when he or she goes into the local school, turns off the alarm system in the schools that I represent, and turns the lights on, and they have the rehearsal or the drama presentation, or afterwards, when they have the keys to the kitchen facilities, they leave it just the way they found it. Well, I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, those days do not exist in the Halifax Regional School Board. And that is a shame. That is a shame because taxpayers pay the dollars to make sure that these schools have been built, that these schools are heated, and that the lights work, and that the plumbing works, and that the school that they paid for, they can have fair access to. In December of last year, I wrote a letter to Carol Olson from the HRSB, and Ms. Olson replied back to me on the 22nd of December, and I will table this letter in a moment, where she says, there are 3 clerks administering the function for over 137 schools in our region. There is a well-defined process for booking schools that is fairly simple and clear. And I want you to know, when I talked to Ms. Olson about this letter, I pointed out to her in her new job as the CEO, she'd better get her facts straight, because that is certainly not the case. Not the case at all in the growing community that I represent, because there are 2 tiers of access to school. And I'm going to come to those 2 tiers in a moment. But let me tell you, when the Liberals were on that side, and there was a negotiation in place with certain private developers, I want to know who was asleep at the switch. Did anybody understand how schools operated? Does anybody have any grasp on cafeteria profits, on access to the gym, on access to the computer room? Who possibly would have been negotiating those contracts than somebody else who knew absolutely nothing about schools and how they operate? Did that government at the time just turn it over to the lawyers and say, you take care of it? Well, let me tell you, that is a shameful excuse, an absolutely irresponsible way of negotiating a contract on how important schools, however they're built and however they're financed, schools have to be having access to communities around which they are built. And let me tell you, I know the ministers at the time pointed out that in the growing community that I represent, there were 3 P3 schools, and that communities that I represent welcomed those schools. Not a question. We were desperate. And I know the member from Sackville Beaverbank who represent a part of the Hammonds Plains that wrote that time, I know that that member could testify to the fact that Hammonds Plains Elementary had 10 portable classrooms around it. 10 portable classrooms. And Madeline Simons, when it was built, was well received. At that St. Margaret's Bay Elementary, old ancient schools that the acting leader of the Liberal Party attempted to have a press conference at one day during an election, at which time he was shooed off the school grounds. Let me tell you that that school, St. Margaret's Bay Elementary, was well received. That P3 school was needed in the community. And in the community, the historic community of Beachville, settled in 1815 by blacks who came to this province out of their own choice. Black Nova Scotians who look forward to having access to a new school in their community, Ridge Cliff Middle School, which takes in grades 6, 7, 8, and 9. Mr. Speaker, the matter of financing the schools was something that I, as an MLA at the time, questioned but without doubt, the people in the community that I represent look forward to the opportunity of being in these schools. Look who went to the chair. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to clarify a few facts for you as we look at this. Let's look very carefully at a number of matters. We are looking about the fact that the community wants access to schools. And I'd like to point out that that is more than just young people. And I would like to use a couple of examples from the community that I represent. The Seniors Gardening Club on the Prospect Road always wants to have the opportunity to be able to have their meetings in the school. They don't need a gym, Mr. Speaker. They don't need the library. They will just take a classroom. They will take a classroom. A group of seniors who likes to get together in the growing community that I represent, and it's sometimes, Mr. Speaker, they like to meet in the afternoon. And in the afternoon, there's that opportunity when, the school is being emptied, an elementary school. It's a prime time for some of these seniors to have a place to meet. Now, Mr. Speaker, is this piece of legislation considerate of these seniors? It is saying, as the Minister of Health Promotion has rightfully said, as the Minister of Education has said, we have to have these young people busy, we have to have these young people involved, and they should have free access to our schools, to our gymnasiums. Well, I want to clarify something here. When you get access to a school, there are other important facilities that are also there, not just the gymnasium. And I know the minister, I know that particular minister, and I know of the great school that is in his community, Cobequid Educational Center, and the facilities that are used there, the rental of those facilities revolve more than just around that fabulous gymnasium that has all those championship banners hanging around it from the home of the Cougars. It involves the other parts of the school that are necessary for a community to be able to meet and greet, whether it's the church, whether it's a seniors group, or, Mr. Speaker, let's try this particular piece of clarification. And I'm interested in how this is going to unfold. The toughest time in the school year for me is the Monday after March break. And I want members opposite and members of the third party to listen to this. I want members of this assembly to understand that the toughest day in the school system is the Monday after March break. Because it's on that day, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps a member of your family, when she had the opportunity to say, so, what did you do on March break? And you look at the kids, and the kids say, well, sir or miss, I didn't go anywhere. My parents can't afford a trip to wherever. We didn't go skiing. We stayed in our community. And what did you do? Well, I usually got up out of bed about 11, and then I played a few video games, and then maybe I went down and hung around the mall. And many of those young people would have absolutely relished the opportunity to be able to drop into their school, not to be in class, no, let's be clear on that, but to drop into the school, shoot some hoops, play some table tennis, perhaps just sit around in the cafeteria or the drama room and listen to some music. And I want you to know that is one tough day when you look at that Monday after March break, and those young people, they haven't used their March break well. They haven't been physically active. They haven't been mentally active. They have done nothing. And why? Because they cannot get access to their school. So I wanted to be clarified, and it's something that I'm looking for that will be brought up at law amendments, that we're talking about schools that are going to be open and accessible over March break, over the summer vacation, when you have an opportunity, if you wish, to use the gymnasium, or if you wish with proper supervision to use the cafeteria or to use the computer room. And I bring up that word computer room because there are some schools in this province where there are adult groups that have the opportunity to go in and use the computers with supervision. Now there are other schools that say, nope, the computer room is off limits. So let's look very clearly at what we're saying about rental of school facilities. I would like to make sure that the minister's opposite, that when we look forward to law amendments, we're talking about access to the school completely. Complete access to the school. So that if we want to have a meeting, and it's a non-profit organization, and it's the annual general meeting of whatever the organization is, and I have the opportunity to attend the annual general meeting of the Beachville Lakeside Timberley Trails Association next week. And where are we going to meet? Well, we have to meet where we can have little or no rent. We can't get into the schools in our community because of the offensive rents. We're not using the gymnasium, I want to make clear to the House. We are not using the expensive cafeterias because we probably will get 25 or 30 people at the annual meeting of the Rails to Trails Association in the communities of Beachville, Lakeside, and Timberley. We would like to have an opportunity to take one of the classrooms, to set up the overhead, to plug in the coffee pot, and to have our annual general meeting. We'll put all the desks back in order. We'll make sure that when we leave as adults, we're trustworthy enough, I hope, that we can have the AGM in a rent-free facility. That doesn't happen in the community that I represent. And there is absolutely no excuse for it allowed to be continued. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have some concerns about consistency. Consistency as we look at how things are going to go across this province. Now, consider the fact, Mr. Speaker, that a bunch of young people in the community that I represent come to their MLA just prior to March break. And I know many of them by a first-name basis, and they call me Bill, not Mr. Estabrooks anymore. Bill, we want to have an old-timer like you come in over March break and supervise a ball hockey league over March break. And we want to have it every afternoon from 1 to 5. They aren't organized. They're not a member of a club. They're not a member of a team. They're not a member of a soccer association. They have no minor hockey affiliation. They're not a member of the basketball team from the community. They are a bunch of young people who want to be busy, and they want to organize themselves, and they've come to their MLA as a responsible adult, although you might question their choice of choices. But they've decided that they would like to have just set up a league over March break and play ball hockey every afternoon from 1 to 4. I think it's important that this piece of legislation clarifies the fact clubs, teams, and groups, or other groups that the minister deems will be available for free rent. Let's face it, Mr. Speaker, some of the best things that happen with young people aren't organized. In fact, at times, I question the fact, particularly with our great national game, although I know lacrosse is our national game, our great national ice hockey game, I question with the fact that at times kids are over-organized. They are over-structured when it comes to just being able to play. And I've heard the member from Cape Breton Nova, based upon his experience in his previous career, tell me numerous times, it's good to be there as an adult to help them, to supervise the activity, to be present just in case, but it's important to allow them to organize themselves so that they go and they have some plain old-fashioned fun, Mr. Speaker. Now, will that type of group, will that informal type of organization, a bunch of kids who just want to stay busy over March break, and let's be clear, they're not a member of a soccer association, they have nothing to do with the local minor hockey group, they just want to have the chance to go and use their school. They just want to be able to go in there on a completely unstructured fashion and play. Just play. And I, as the responsible adult, I guess would have the responsibility of refereeing or sitting there watching them or whatever else. Will that particular group, Mr. Speaker, will they be allowed the opportunity to have rent-free use of school facilities? Let's take another example. And it's an example that I can tell you personally of in my community. You try to have a place where the kids can drop in. The drop-in center. The feared drop-in center that parents hear of. Because the number one concern is, how loud is the music going to be? How loud will the neighbors complain when the music is too loud for them? The place to have that drop-in center, the place that's so that if you could advertise in the local recreation facility is available, or heaven forbid, the local school's available, and that kids who want to drop in between 6 and 9 every evening, room 228 is available. Bring your own CDs at whatever time. We said 9, 8:30. We're going to clean up and we're out the door. Isn't that a wonderful opportunity to use our school facilities? But it's an informal group, Mr. Speaker. It's not a team. It's not a club. It's not a recognized group. It is, after all, just the opportunity for young people to be able to feel this is my school. This is my school where I can go when I don't have to sit there and read out of a book or pick something off a computer. This is my school. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? They will have ownership of their school. You won't have the problems that we have now. And I've heard my good friend from Dartmouth North speak of the problems. I've heard him speak of John Martin Junior High. I've heard him speak of how it's so difficult to get into the schools. So, you know, the kids will hang around the schools. They're like magnets. They will hang around the schools all hours of the day and night. And if you give them that time on their hands, there will be some vandalism. There will be some difficulties. And inevitably, Mr. Speaker, as you well know from your previous career, they will be showing up as in your previous career. You know where to find the kids? They're hanging around the locked school. They're hanging around the school that has its lights turned off. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, that's a concern in my community, and you're going to hear from the other members of my caucus who are going to bring this forward. That's a concern in all of our communities. Kids have to feel comfortable. Seniors have to feel comfortable. Church groups have to feel comfortable in their community school. But how schools are being run in the HRSB in particular, they have no ownership. They have nothing really involved in it. When a senior goes into a school during the day, the ultimate compliment is that the young person who sees them coming in opens the door and says to them, "Welcome to our school." I have had seniors come into the schools where I've been fortunate enough to teach as resource people. Seniors who come into the school and spoken to my history classes, who've talked about their historic communities, who've come in and actually given history lessons that I guess really count with these young people, local history lessons. And that's that interaction, Mr. Speaker, between students and seniors, where seniors can feel they can come into the school. You know, there's a walking club in one of the communities that I represent. And the walking club meanders along, goes by the trail, and comes to the school. Now, what a wonderful opportunity for them to feel comfortable enough to come into the cafeteria for a moment, to grab a cup of tea or to have a glass of water, to sit down in an informal situation and say, we are going to take a break here between 1 and 2 or 1:30 and 2 during our afternoon walk, because we just like to have the opportunity to come into our school. Now, there's the message for the young people. The young people are changing classes and they look in the cafeteria, and there's the seniors group. The senior walking group in the community has a regular tour and gets the opportunity during the day or after hours if they wish to use the facility at no cost. That's the key thing, at no cost. Now, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity, and I'll table for the members of the House, the interesting article written by Kathy Nichol in the Daily News of April 19th, in which she quotes Doug Hadley. You can take that one right there, and I can use this one. School board ponders impact of ending fees. And I think it's of real importance that we understand that if this piece of legislation is going to be truly successful, it has to be outlined very specifically the conditions when it comes to free rentals of school facilities. I've heard the stories. They come because of the fact there's still going to be a door person when you come into the school. The door person, rightfully so, is the person who makes sure that, the alarm's back on and the lights are off. Let's do the other order. The lights are off and the alarm's back on before he or she leaves at the end of the evening because she's the door monitor. But who's going to pay for that door monitor? Is that going to be one of the fees that's going to be decided, well, you have a door monitor here. We no longer have the custodian costs, but the door monitor still has to be covered. And we look at that, whatever that amount is going to be, who's going to cover that? That's a concern, because if you look at how things have happened in the Halifax Regional School Board, I can give you the short history when it came to continuing community use of schools. There was a noble experience in Flint, Michigan. And Flint, Michigan was a part of use of the schools in that small city in that particular part of the United States. And there were Halifax Regional, I should correct myself, Halifax County School Board members who took the opportunity to go to Flint, Michigan and see how community schools work in that area and how you can make your school such an integral part of the community and not have it with its lights turned off and its doors locked night after night. And sure enough, a community school example was established in the Halifax County School Board. But then suddenly, Mr. Speaker, we had administrators. We had bureaucrats. We had clerks signing contracts. We had a complete bureaucracy created by the school board that I worked for at the time, where before, if I wanted to use the school, I went to the principal, and I know there's members opposite from other parts of the province who say, well, that's the way it is in my community. Well, count your lucky stars that it's that way. If you can still go into the school and say to the secretary or to the principal, look, I want to use the school next Wednesday night. Is it available? And the secretary or the principal or his or her designate should say, yeah, you can use the school between 6 and 8. Just make sure that you have the classroom back in order, and we'll let you use such and such a class. Well, that's a wonderful amount of flexibility that makes common sense, Mr. Speaker. But it does not exist in the community that I represent. To try to get into schools and the paperwork that has to be put in place and the clerks that you have to go through and the answering machines that you have to deal with, you have to make sure that they are booked so many weeks in advance. And that, of course, comes to the issue of real consequence. You have to have $1 million deductible insurance. I am using the library for a meeting. If I am the one responsible for signing the contract, have to have insurance. It's not that I'm playing ball hockey or shooting a few hoops, Mr. Speaker. I have to have $1 million insurance if I'm the one signing the contract. Is that open access to schools? So I think it's of real consequence that in the negotiations that are taking place across this province by the department staff and the Minister of Education, that we point out that in some areas it works. I've always believed as a school teacher, as an athletic coach, in the KISS theory. Keep it simple, and the word I'm not allowed to use in my home, stupid. KISS. Why does it have to be that we create these bureaucracies when it comes to such a simple thing as renting of schools? Why with the 137 schools does the CEO, who has the new job at the time, tell me in the response, it's clear and it's simple? Well, as Ms. Olson knows from the follow-up conversations that I've had, it is certainly not clear and it is certainly not simple. And I also want to clarify this particular point, and it's a real concern, and I know members are going to bring it to the attention of the House. We're talking about use of school facilities. What about school fields? Now, you want complication? I know there are members of the Halifax Regional Municipality who served as councillors, who served as regional councillors. Who's actually responsible for school fields in the Halifax Regional Municipality. Don't ask me, Mr. Speaker. Try to get onto a ball field. And how do you do it? Who does the cleanup? Who does the maintenance? Who takes care of any kind of grass cutting? The answer, of course, is it's the HRM. It's the HRM, and if you want complication when it comes to using any type of facility, especially a school field, well, you are really headed for trouble then. You want to make sure that it gets complicated, then you have a real problem when it comes to using school facilities, outdoor facilities. So that has to be clarified. Again, we're not just talking the gymnasium. We are not just talking the physically active part of the interior of the school. We're talking about the outdoor part of the school also. And I know that there are members present who go like, what are you telling me? It's Sunday afternoon, your team wants to have a ball practice, and no one's using the diamond in the school field. You go over and use it. No, Mr. Speaker. Doesn't work. There has to be all kinds of forms filled out in advance. And of course, there has to be, if the field, heaven forbid, had lights, which only a few school fields in my community do, then you're looking at other costs that have to be involved. So, I mean, there are those sorts of issues that have to be clarified before we deal with the approval of this piece of legislation. And I know I'm talking about the HRM in particular, but that's my experience as a school teacher. And I know that the HRM is currently going through a review of indoor facilities. Indoor facilities. And I know the member from Preston is very relieved with the fact that there will be a facility in his community. And I congratulate what work he's done for that. And I also congratulate Mr. Hensby for his initiative in getting that particular recreation center built. But that review of facilities has identified the area most in need of facilities, and I'm talking indoor facilities. This is what the HRM is having a committee on at this very time. They have identified the Prospect Road as the area that needs more indoor facilities. And that's because we can't get in our schools. We can't get into them in a regular fashion, and in a fashion that we can use them for all kinds of reasons. So I wanted to be clear. There is an example in the HRM that works and works well. It is in the beautiful community of Cow Bay. And that is the Tallahassee Community School. The Tallahassee Community School is a one-of-a-kind, where there is a part of the building where you get a different access in the evening, where you have the opportunity to come in and use that school as the ones in Flint, Michigan were designed. But what happened with that, Mr. Speaker? Other schools across this province are as tight with the security as probably we could say from our experience in penal institutions across this region. And they are guarded by the fact that that is something that no one is going to be allowed in for one reason or another unless they have the right insurance, unless they have the amount of fee in their pocket, and then, of course, they are an organized group. And what does that do, Mr. Speaker? I'll tell you what it does. It puts young people, it puts seniors, it puts people who are in the lower incomes at a tremendous disadvantage. A tremendous disadvantage because they cannot afford. What about that young man who wants to play ball hockey over March break? He can't afford to play ice hockey, Mr. Speaker. He can't afford to go away with mom and dad skiing to wherever on March break, but he wants to have the opportunity to use the school gym for an informal game of ball hockey. Unstructured. Drop in and play ball hockey. And someone will be there, an adult, to get you through the afternoon just to make sure that, you know, the lights are off and the doors are locked before you leave. That, after all, is what it's all about. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to return to something, and it has to be addressed. And I know the members of the third party will be upset with this, because I know some of the new members of the third party, they don't quite want to remember Robbie Harrison. They don't want, remember Robbie Harrison? They don't want to quite remember some of those ministers of education over there that were in the middle of this disastrous thing called P3 schools. There are 39 P3 schools in this province, which serve an estimated 13,000 students and untold numbers of community groups. Scotian learning schools are the big problem. Let's be clear on it. They are the problem. Rental fees in these schools can run from $50 an hour for a single gym to $95. Now, there are two other companies involved. Ashford Investments, Mr. Speaker, and Nova Learning have said rental fees in their schools are collected by the school boards. So I say, if it can work for Ashford Investments, it can work for Nova Learning, why can't it work for the Armoyan Group? Now, heaven forbid we use that name. Because heaven forbid that name is brought up, because whatever the umbrella organization is called this day, I know that Mr. Armoyan must have seen the Liberal education ministers coming when they negotiated that contract. They must have seen them coming. Because to his credit, and to those businessmen's credit, let's face it, they negotiated a contract in the hard-nosed fashion that they are usually doing in the business world. But I bet when they come out of those meetings, they would say, well, that was like leading a lamb to the slaughter. I mean, can you believe that they agreed to allow us to have those cafeteria profits? I mean, didn't they see that coming? And guess what? We can charge $95 a pop. We can charge those fees. But they never said a thing. Never said a thing. And now what is happening? I will tell you, in the community that I represent, P3 schools are the bane of our existence when it comes to community access. These P3 schools must be dealt with. Growing community. A growing community that needs access to the facilities. They want access to the gymnasium. They want access to the cafeteria. They have to pay through the nose, Mr. Speaker. They have to pay big fees. St. Margaret's Bay Elementary, the school field. We would like to be able to host soccer tournaments on that school field. If and when it is ever ready and up to spec. It has been operating now for 3 years. The school field has always been in such bad shape because it was sort of an add-on. Oh, we'll put the school field over there. Look at what is happening in the middle of these growing communities. And there are other ones across this province. In the middle of these growing communities, where these schools were needed, no doubt, to get away from the overcrowding and the difficulties that we were facing in the classroom, these 3 schools that I speak of, Madeline Simons, St. Margaret's Bay Elementary, and Ridgecliffe, are not part of our community. They're not part of the kids' community. They go there during the day. They get a quality education because of the teachers and the books and the proper facilities that they have. And they are bright, shiny, nice buildings, no doubt. But in the evening, they are empty. They are not being used. Those schools are not part of the community that I represent, Mr. Speaker. They're not part of the community because the community, the seniors, the young people, the people in the community who are volunteers, they drive by that school and say, that's a P3 school. That's not our school because we can't get fair and free access to it. And when this particular piece of legislation was introduced, when we went to the bill briefing, to the credit of the media, the very first question that Paul Withers of CBC asked the acting minister at the time, does this include P3 schools? And the acting minister, of course, said, I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not because we just can't deal with that contract. I mean, let's face it, it's a contract that works to the advantage of the private owner that's running that school and not the public, not the parents, not the pupils. That's the 3 Ps that should count: parents, pupils, public. not private partner. And Mr. Speaker, that issue must be addressed. Otherwise, we will have a two-tier access to schools across this municipality, and I guess in certain areas across this province. Now, I can point fingers at them, and I'll be interested to see what they're going to say about this, but it would seem to me that we have to take the bull by the horns, if that's an appropriate expression, Mr. Speaker. We have to take this issue on, because if these other private developers, if Scotia Learning Schools are going to be treated differently from Ashford Investments and Nova Learning, the people that I represent are going to be treated unfairly. They are going to be treated in a fashion that does not speak of fairness. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, that is what Nova Scotians expect. They expect fairness. So when this piece of legislation came forward, there is no doubt that many people across the province said, good for this government. That's a positive step. Now, mind you, the school board will have to offset some fees in another way, but that's a positive step to allow some consistency across the province to facilities across this province in schools. That's a positive step. But then there are other communities who are saying, oh, it doesn't apply to certain communities because they are stuck. They are burdened. They have to face P3 schools. Now, the ministers who are involved in this negotiation, I would encourage them to look carefully at the other contracts. And if it is possible under any way, if it is possible, we have to make sure that there is access across this province to all communities, whether they have P3 schools or whether they have the regular schools. That's fairness, Mr. Speaker. That's what Nova Scotians expect from that government. They expect it from this party and the members of the third party who negotiated such a disastrous deal called P3 schools. It's come back to haunt us. It will continue to haunt us. My children and my grandchildren might have to live with this contractual problem called P3 schools. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have various other comments that I am going to make, and I know it's a real concern to members that when we speak of personal experience. I know the member from Dartmouth North is going to be concerned about access to John Martin. And I know the situation at John Martin because I had the opportunity to take sports teams there and play in that facility. How were they? And let me tell you, that community turned out on those Saturday tournaments to support their home teams. They were there because it was their school. However, we are not going to have that continuing affiliation with schools unless such groups are allowed to have free access to the entire facilities. Now, I know that the member from Dartmouth North is very fortunate to have a community center close to John Martin School. It's a wonderful facility. But, and I'm sure that when he was in the HRM as a Dartmouth councillor, he worked for that facility. But can you imagine John Martin Junior High and the community center in the north end of Dartmouth working together? That will really demonstrate to kids, to seniors, to volunteers, well, if we can't get into the John Martin gym tonight, perhaps, or the John Martin classroom, perhaps there might be a space for us over at the community center. Can you understand, I know you do, Mr. Speaker, based upon your experience in your wonderful community, how a school is such an integral part of the community, such an integral part of the community. And I look forward to hearing from my young friend from Sackville-Cobequid, because I want to join this House in telling the story of, it's not the story of the event, of having a 6 o'clock practice at Sackville High School. Now, this particular athletic team that I was coaching lost. And let me tell you, I take some of those things personally. So I said to the gentleman in the dressing room that night, well, tomorrow morning I'll see you at 6 o'clock because you're going to school a little early. Make sure you're there, because when you come into that gym, the country music's going to be blaring, and you are going to have from 6 to 8:30, 2 hours of one upset coach. So at 5 to 6 I showed up, I turned the alarm off, and I went in and turned the lights on in the gym, and the young men began to arrive. And about a half an hour into the torment that they had to put up with, who showed up but an RCMP officer? An RCMP officer showed up because the doors were open, and if you know where Sackville High is, people are going by, and we must have been reported somebody had broken into the school. What would somebody be using the school at 6:30 in the morning for? Well, it was being used because it was a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate to those young men who had the opportunity the next time they lose that athletic event, they will have another 6 o'clock practice, and it again will be to country music. But you know what I had to receive later? I received a call from the school board. Because, of course, once the Mountie arrived and said, "Oh, that's right, you're the coach, you're the vice principal. What are you doing here at 6 o'clock in the morning?" "We're having a little fun, we're having a little practice." I was having lots of fun. I had my best music going. Those teenagers had to listen to what I was going to play, and we had her cranked. And as they went through that music, let me tell you, as we went through that music, I faced the music at about 9:30 that morning when I was told I didn't have the forms filled out. I didn't have the forms filled out. What was I doing in this school having an athletic event when school wasn't operating? I mean, school operates in most schools across the HRM from 8:30 to 3:30. But if you go outside of those parameters, what was I doing in my school, in the community that I was so fortunate enough to work and teach and coach, because I didn't have the forms filled out? Now, Mr. Speaker, is that laughable? Is that, after all, the absolute height of ridiculousness when I have to, in that situation, have a 6 o'clock practice that I'm supposed to fill out in advance? Mr. Speaker, that's an indication of a system that isn't working, and this particular government and this particular piece of legislation will address issues such as that, I hope. They will address the issue because I think it's important, the day of going back to the good old days. And I began my comments by saying how proud I was in the community that I grew up in, that the school principal trusted my father enough to give him the school keys. To give him the school keys. So that when my dad wanted to use the school, here's the keys, Mr. Estabrooks. You open it up, and when you're finished, you turn the lights off and you lock it back up. It's not rocket science, it's simple. You're part of it. You're part of your school. It's your community. It's your community school. It's used in a way that we all feel comfortable. Now, Mr. Speaker, as you can tell from my comments, my friends will be following me with other comments. This is a piece of legislation at this stage of which we have many more questions than answers. This is a piece of legislation that we're looking forward to going to law amendments, but we want clarification on a couple of points. Clarification, Mr. Speaker, if I may, and I want the member from Lunenburg West to know that I have to wear the tie, but I can't have my own handkerchief. The community has to know the specifics. They have to know the specifics, not just the gymnasium. Do they get use of the school cafeteria? Do they get use of the school kitchen facilities? Or the library? Do they get use of the computer room? These are all issues. Do they get use of the school fields? And I understand that in other jurisdictions that might not be the case, but do they get use of the school fields? Because it is a complicated process here within the Halifax Regional Municipality, unlike it's in other areas. So as I wrap up my comments, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to this piece of legislation going through the law amendments. I thank the Minister for bringing this piece of legislation forward, and I look forward to hearing from groups as they make their views known in the valuable process in this legislature of law amendments. I know that we'll be hearing from school boards associations. Hopefully we'll be hearing from community groups, because if we are going to allow schools to truly be part of the community, they must have free and equal access to all schools, public schools, P3 schools, schools all across this province, in a manner that is not just for our young people, not just for our organized groups, but for our seniors and for citizens of all ages. And I thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister of Education for bringing this forward. Our caucus supports this bill in principle. I must say it's standard, true to form. The politicians are behind the public because our communities have been calling for this for quite some time. I also want to commend the government for giving the school boards a draft policy last fall to give them an opportunity to have a look and see how this will affect their year. One of the questions that we have surrounding this bill has been whether or not that the minister has given the school boards an assurance that they will cover the shortfall in revenue that is covered coming forward from this bill. Is the province prepared to put funding that may be lost as a result of this policy? We've heard a lot today about the P3 schools. I am quite fortunate to have one of those in my riding. The parents of the students in Annapolis Royal, Parkers Cove, Delapps Cove, Victoria Beach, don't ask whether it's a P3 school or not. They ask whether or not their children are going to a safe environment and getting an opportunity to learn in a quality school. And the answer is resoundingly yes. I heard the minister when he was speaking earlier. He said that they would be hindered by a P3 arbitration ruling. My question, I guess, would be, has there been any negotiation with the P3 school operators? Has anyone moved forward to ask to see if there was any avenues that we could work towards to develop to make sure that these schools were opened? The other thing which I think is sadly missing from this piece of legislation, we talked today a lot about health promotion. One of the things that is missing from this is making physical activity part of the school curriculum on a daily basis when we have the auditoriums there. I've been quite fortunate in my riding, Mr. Speaker, that the administrators in our schools are quite open to allow us the opportunity to come in and use the facilities whenever possible. The real problem for my riding with this legislation is the fact we don't have enough gyms. We're limited. In 1999, Bridgetown Elementary School was a top priority of the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board to have a new gym. Lo and behold, last year, just prior to an election, with all the announcements that were taking place, one of the schools that were left off the equation was Bridgetown Elementary School. Somehow it kept getting bumped further and further down the field. We have one high school that is completely booked. The gymnasium time is completely booked in there. We have an elementary school without one. No matter how much legislation we put in front to open up the community schools to our community, without a gymnasium, it's useless. The minister spoke earlier and talked about a partnership between the school and community. I listened to that with quite a bit of interest. The community of Middleton has put before the Department of Education a wonderful proposal, $1.8 million proposal. It was to develop and build on to their existing high school a double gymnasium. The impetus behind this was the fact that their gymnasium now is 90% booked. But what's really pushing it forward now is they have a music room which has been deemed unfit for the teacher to be using because of the decibel sounds of the music that's taken. The room is not fit for a music room. Well, the school has said we can move the music into our multi-purpose room. At a cost of about $400,000, we can make that room fit. What the community has then come forward and said, instead of putting $400,000 to build an addition onto that room to make it fit, why don't we take that money and put it into a double gym? Why don't we put it in so then we can have not only solve the issue of music, but solve the issue of access to our gymnasium for our community. We're talking a lot today about health promotion and all the things that go along with this. This bill is a good step towards some of that, But in my community, one of the things that we need to be brought forward, not only is this legislation, but we need some money to come forward to be able to develop those school gymnasiums. I look forward to hearing what's going to come forward in law amendments, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this.
Thank you. Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to get up today, Mr. Speaker, and speak on this bill, on Bill 48, and education facilities, Mr. Speaker. For many years on my job as the executive director of a youth center, I had access to the provincially owned school across the street from the youth center, and it was just great. Many activities for many kids there. We had many functions there, and it was all free of charge. It's just that I'm just hoping that this bill, Mr. Speaker, would make all schools in the province of Nova Scotia free of charge. You know, the P3 schools are a sore point, and I represent a community where I have two P3 schools in my community. Two of them, absolutely. Harborside Elementary School, where my son attends, Daniel, and Sherwood Park Educational Center. Very high-tech schools, beautiful schools, cafetoriums, they call them, with the cafeteria and auditoriums and that, but with no access, Mr. Speaker, for the community groups and nonprofit organizations like Girl Guides or any of those things. Like the 587 Squadron in Whitney Pier uses the provincially owned school every Tuesday and Sundays for they have sports day, and Tuesday night for their days when they have the squadron in, and they're all free of charge, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's just, but I mean, the P3 school was an expensive experiment to the taxpayers of this province, Mr. Speaker. It was an experiment that failed drastically in this province. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it was a good business deal, Mr. Speaker, for the people in the business community that made this deal. I mean, they're laughing all the way to the bank, Mr. Speaker. They outsmarted the government of the day. I mean, if I was a member of that business community, I would be very happy that I outsmarted a provincial government. I mean, I took their coffers to the bank in my account.
Provincial Liberal government.
Well, a provincial government was outsmarted by a bunch of businessmen, Mr. Speaker. Now, we talked about earlier today, Mr. Speaker, about the Office of Health Promotion and the province activity youth strategy, Mr. Speaker. This, you know, this will completely undermine the strategy of the Office of Health Promotion without having access to these P3 schools, Mr. Speaker. The reality is that many parents cannot afford to pay for the high cost of the P3 school rentals, Mr. Speaker. They just can't. In my riding, they cannot afford to pay for that school rentals. There's just no way at all, you know.
Tell me about some of those young people.
You know, some of those young people, they just can't. 49% of the student population at Harborside Elementary School come from single-parent families, Mr. Speaker. Now, how many of those single-parent family members can actually afford to pay the price for the gym for their children to get physical activity, Mr. Speaker? None.
What about the breakfast program?
You know, those things. I mean, the breakfast programs in the school. I mean, to get permission to open the school up early in the morning, to have volunteers come in and serve breakfasts to kids on the way to school in the morning, and make sure that they're having a nutritious meal before the day starts, Mr. Speaker. I mean, the P3 schools are, you know, how much are the gym rates are 5 times higher in the P3 schools than they are in the provincially owned school, Mr. Speaker. And earlier today, Mr. Speaker, I spoke about youth strategy and activity, and I'm going to like to say that obesity is deadly and has been linked to a number of chronic diseases, Mr. Speaker, such as diabetes. Promoting an active, healthy lifestyle to our young people is one way to battle this epidemic. But with no facility for these young people to get active, how are we going to tackle this problem, Mr. Speaker? And by the way, Mr. Speaker, the Nun-Strait area of the Cape Breton Island has the highest obesity in the province of Nova Scotia at 24%, Mr. Speaker. Now, we do need the access to these schools to get our young people access, to put on some physical recreation programs, Mr. Speaker, for these kids. You know, there are serious implications, Mr. Speaker, in society in general and in families today, Mr. Speaker. I know myself as a young man growing up, Mr. Speaker, if I had not been able to have access to a gymnasium I would have been in a lot of more trouble than I was growing up, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, you were?
I would have been in some trouble, Mr. Speaker, by being on the roads all evening, Mr. Speaker. But I spent many and many good evenings in Trinity Church Community Hall, playing basketball,
Now you're the kind of guy.
playing floor hockey, playing baseball, supervisor by the local reverend. And I was a Roman Catholic, Mr. Speaker. And yet the reverend spent time with us kids in our community, giving us physical activity in that little community hall down there.
And that's
By the
kind
way,
of thing
you know,
do at
in those days, and I just think that my busy hands are happy hands, Mr. Speaker. If you're marching, you're not fighting. So in those days, there was a lot of volunteers, Mr. Speaker, that would come in and put on these programs for us, Mr. Speaker. You know, and in my community alone, we used to have 3 Little League ball teams in the community of Whitney Pier. Now we have none.
Why is that?
We don't have any. We had a 4-team Midget B hockey league. We don't have any. We had a 5-team basketball league. We don't have any. Now, it's only been a generation. Where have all these leagues and all these programs gone? Because of the inaccessibility of the P3 schools in our community, Mr. Speaker, we cannot get the kids in there, Mr. Speaker. We just cannot get this in there. How many thousands of children across this province, Mr. Speaker, are not active because they cannot access these schools, Mr. Speaker?
The aerobics program.
You know, and how many of the adults and the seniors do not have access to a walking program or to any kind of Tai Chi or any of those kind of programs, Mr. Speaker?
Or aerobic programs.
You know,
in the P3
and what about the people that rely on these schools for their regular meetings, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah.
For their meetings, whether it be quilting or sewing or any of those kind of things, you know. But I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, the Tory government in 2000 did a great thing. They canceled the P3 school program in the year 2000. I think that was one of the better moves in the last 5 years in government in this province, Mr. Speaker, by the government across the way there, Mr. Speaker.
With our
you
help.
know, but I mean, with the help of this party, yes, I think that was a very, very good thing to do, Mr. Speaker. But I wonder, Mr. Speaker, when I look at this and think of the social aspect, I mean, to understand that by the activity of these kids, it reduces crime rate, it helps you socially, you know, it dysfunctional young people in a sense of giving them something to do and making them active. Instead of being on the street corners, being in the gym in a midnight basketball program on a Friday night where there's less crime rate, there's no BEDs, there's no break and enters, there's no nobody drinking over in these places where they go drinking in the evenings, the teenagers and that, if they had access to be in these gyms, Mr. Speaker. You know, I just think that there has to be more accessibility for the normal people, middle class people, and people that can't afford to put their kids into the rep hockey program where it costs thousands of dollars to travel, thousands of dollars. You have to have thousands of dollars just to have your kid in those programs, Mr. Speaker. You know, the sad part about this is the high cost and the rental fees. We've heard today from my esteemed colleague from Timberley Prospect on the high cost for these schools and the rentals for these schools. I mean, there's nobody in my district that got to pay for these schools, you know. But also we looked at what my colleague from Timberley Prospect said about having the ball fields and the soccer fields. They are fenced in and locked up, Mr. Speaker. So in other words, Mr. Speaker, in order for these kids to access these fields, they'll have to get a ladder to get over the fence. I mean, there's no way that they should have these fields locked up, these ball fields and these soccer fields, Mr. Speaker. I think that it's important that we have more people involved in these opening these schools and getting them up. You know what I mean? Inactivity, Mr. Speaker, can lead to down the road. We're talking about health promotion. Inactivity. Could you imagine the less burden it is on the health department for somebody that's active and healthy and leading a good lifestyle, like biking and promoting stuff like that, Mr. Speaker, and having access to these programs, Mr. Speaker? There are 39 P3 schools in the province, Mr. Speaker. Right. An estimated 13,000 students, Mr. Speaker. You know, an untold number of community groups looking for access to these schools, Mr. Speaker, which they cannot get.
Shame on those liberals.
Shame on. You know, Mr. Speaker, I just wish that the government of the day would legislate somehow or another, Mr. Speaker. I'm only a rookie in this legislature, but I wish somehow or another that we could legislate to get rid of these P3 schools and take them back from the province. somehow or another. We can legislate increases, pay decreases. We can legislate all kinds of other things in this province, Mr. Speaker, but we can't legislate getting rid of these P3 schools. I think it would be a bold move, Mr. Speaker, somehow if we could legislate as being responsible to the taxpayers of this province to get rid of these P3 schools. We can do all kinds of things in this legislation, but it sure would be nice to get rid of these schools where they're charging an extraordinary amount of money for young people to get active, extraordinary amount of money. You know, it's just that so many of those diseases today, Mr. Speaker, that we talk about, and the government is planning on targeting some of these strategies about getting the kids active and getting them going and keeping them activity, Mr. Speaker. But we need to have this P3 school stuff taken care of, Mr. Speaker. Somehow we should look at it as all parties in here, yeah, I mean, it's going to cost my son and my grandson out of his pocket for years and years to come to pay for these schools. I just don't think it's fair, Mr. Speaker. I think that the people in the community deserve a better deal. You know what I mean?
Sure do. You sure do.
Well, just that the whole province's idea of a youth strategy for healthy activity is undermined with these schools. I mean, there's no way in the world that they can access these schools. And I just think it's improper, and I think that the cost is just so high. You know what I mean, Mr. Speaker? I just think that it's time that we looked at actually, well, yes, Mr. Speaker, and you know, it sure would be nice, Mr. Speaker, to have a look at that someday of legislating us to make sure that we own those schools one day down the road. I'm pretty well had her, Bill.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would be interested in seeing this bill when it comes before law amendments, Mr. Speaker, to have a look at it and hear what the people of the community have to say. I hope some people travel up from the school boards. I'm just wondering about the cost. That's going to be the new cost by the school boards. Who's going to how are they going to inherit these new costs, Mr. Speaker?
Exactly.
These new costs that are going to have by eliminating these fees. Where is that hundreds of thousands of dollars going to come from to pay for this, Mr. Speaker? Well, hopefully, Mr. Speaker, we're going to hear from many people in Cape Breton and many people in the area that would like to know what this bill actually means and how they feel about it. Maybe the Cape Breton Sydney Victoria School Board will come up here with a representative and law amendments and find out, you know, what's the cost going to be for them. You know what I mean? So maybe we should look at that, Mr. Speaker. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for letting me speak on this bill, and you have a good day.
There we go.
Well, thank you, sir. That's very kind of you. Recognized all member Cape Breton West.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and speak on this particular piece of legislation, albeit that it's only of 3 lines. Mr. Speaker, I agree with many of the comments that have been made with regards to access to the schools, community access, and so on, because I think it's vitally important. It fits in with this holistic approach to healthy living in Nova Scotia. And I think in that context, I think the government is doing the right thing, albeit that when you read the contents of the press release that was put out by the government, the Minister of Health, on behalf of the Minister of Education, this idea of free access to schools and the reality of the free access to schools don't match. They don't match at all. Mr. Speaker, I'll refer you to the press release of April 15th, 2004, where the announcement by the government is made suggesting that a new provincial policy to community use of schools, and it would allow young people up to the age of 21 to use publicly owned school facilities for physical and recreational activities without rental fees. But yet, Mr. Speaker, the government goes on to say in the same press release They will only pay for direct additional costs, including extra custodial services if they don't clean up, replacement of any supplies or equipment that is used or damaged, or staff needed to supervise activities or open and close the schools. And then it goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, all groups using school facilities must have their own liability insurance. Well, where does the freeness come in? Where's the freebie? Where's this general concept of social justice that the government is talking about and the NDP seems to be supporting? The bottom line is, it's not free. There's still somebody at the end of the day has to pay for this. And there's only one taxpayer. Now, whether they take it out of the Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Finance, or wherever, there's only one taxpayer, and these facilities have to be paid for. Now, I've heard some rather brutal attacks on the P3 system. And let's make no mistake about it. There have been mistakes in that system. I wasn't part of the government of the day at the time.
Order, please. Honourable Member Timberley Prospect on a point of order.
I was wondering if the member would allow a question.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West allow a question. Yes? Okay, we'll revert to question period. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect on a question.
As a cabinet minister. So, can you tell us during this time you were not a member of the government? You were not a cabinet minister at that time? You had no role in negotiation of P3 schools?
There we have the Honourable Member Cape Breton West on the answer.
Mr. Speaker, you only need one answer for 3 questions. I was on sabbatical.
Oh, that's right.
But Mr. Speaker, let's make no mistake about it. That issue came before Public Accounts, and every senior public official within the Department of Education, Department of Finance, and you name it, within government, of no political stripe, supported the P3 concept because it was the only viable opportunity for the people of Nova Scotia. The Deputy Minister of Education, the senior directors in that department, yes, and many supporters of the NDP caucus supported it. The member for Halifax Fairview stood in her place and she said, I don't care where you get the money or how it's paid, make sure we get a P3 school for my riding. Go check with the Legislative Library. It's public record. She didn't care how it was paid. Just gimme. But the bottom line is, Mr. Speaker, somebody has to pay. Somebody has to pay. And I agree that we have to have as much access for the people of Nova Scotia as can possibly be made. Now, whether we don't have a direct charge, a user fee, as the government may use, or maybe we umbrella it in as part of a departmental charge, or what, which still, by the way, has not been clarified by the government. This looks to me, if you read the legislation very carefully, it's another opportunity for the provincial government to download on the school boards, because all they're doing is establishing a policy by which the school boards can make these schools available to students, to young people, to groups.
Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Would adjourn the debate for the present moment.
The Honourable Member like to move adjournment debate, please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Motion to adjourn debate. Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the adjournment to enable us to revert to the order of business with the approval of the House to introduction of bills.
Is it agreed? Agreed. Introduction of bills.
The revised statutes, 1989, the Cemeteries and Funeral Services Act.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 62 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Cemetery and Funeral Services Act.
Bill number 57, an act to amend Chapter 62 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Cemetery and Funeral Services Act.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, I would now ask the consent of the House to move this bill onto the order paper for second reading. Mr. Speaker, the intention is that the bill will pass second reading now, tomorrow, at some suitable time to both opposition parties. We'll hold a short session of the Law Amendments Committee and then refer the bill back here for passage on Thursday, subject to the House's consent.
Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading. 57. Bill number 57, the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. 57.
Mr. Speaker, I move bill number 57.
Motion is for second reading of bill number 57. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Cemetery and Funeral Services Act.
Or this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I think at this time we'll adjourn the House and go to the. Yes, understood. Is there any business to?
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on tomorrow's hours and order of business.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow's hours will be from 2 till 6, and the resolutions are 493 and 485. Okay.
Motion is the House adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. We've reached the moment of interruption as the Honourable Member for Cape Breton South has therefore be resolved the $147 million tax cut means $155 checks. Less money is available for vital services like health, education, and transportation. Order, please. We'll get copies around. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton.
Interrupt the proceedings, but are you waiting for a member?
Order, please. If you so wish to start and then relinquish your time once the member arrives. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
On his way, and he is prepared this all afternoon, so he's looking forward to
The House will recess till 6
speaking.
Good, Speaker.
gonna speak?